Well, good morning and good afternoon. My name is Mark Edo and I'm your moderator, and I want to welcome everyone to the second in the Hekima series, where we come together with Africa's deepest thinkers to find pathways. Well, good morning and good afternoon. My name is Mark Edo. Hekima, which means wisdom in Swahili, is a product of the African Influencers for Development, UNDP's partnership initiative that brings together leaders in business, academia, and the arts to co-create sustainable development solutions. Now, following last month's launch of Hekima, which featured a very insightful conversation with Professor Wole Soyinka of Nigeria, we are joined today by another great thinker and Nobel laureate, former President of Liberia, Her Excellency Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. Now, I encourage all of you to post your questions in the Q&A box. You'll find that right at the bottom of the screen, and also put your thoughts in the chat room. As I said, the buttons are right there at the bottom of the screen, and the last panelist is you. So please contribute your questions and thoughts. Now, if you're watching via YouTube, you can use the comment section, and I'll do my best to pose as many of your questions as possible to our guest thinker. And for those who want to hear this in French, please click on the interpretation button and choose French and mute English. I also want to welcome our conveners. UNDP Administrator is joining us, Akim Steiner, you're most welcome, and the Regional Bureau for Africa Director, Ahuna Eziakonwa. You'll hear from them shortly. But first, a short introduction to someone with a long and eventful career, Her Excellency Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. She's known as Africa's Iron Lady, and from very early on, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf was a strong champion of freedom, peace, democracy, justice, and women's empowerment. Her journey's seen her wear many hats: international banker, government minister, UNDP Regional Bureau for Africa Director. And in 2005, she was elected president of Liberia, becoming the first woman to be democratically elected as head of state in Africa. The country she was tasked to lead was in bad shape. Hospitals, schools, and major infrastructure had been destroyed in a decade-long civil war. Hundreds of thousands of people had been killed or they'd been displaced. Ma Ellen, as she's often called, rebuilt the infrastructure and ushered in an economic revival, helping heal her damaged nation. She also saw the country through the Ebola crisis. Her savvy negotiation led to nearly $5 billion in debt relief and the lifting of UN sanctions, allowing Liberia to access international markets again. She's won many awards for maintaining peace, championing women's rights, and defending democracy, culminating in the Nobel Peace Prize in 2011. And since leaving office, she's been very busy. The UN Secretary General appointed her co-chair of the high-level panel of eminent persons tasked with crafting the Sustainable Development Goals. And from 2016 to 2017, she was the first female chairperson of ECOWAS. Now she runs a foundation and can often be found on her farm, where she grows rice, mangoes, and guava. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf is the proud mother of 4 sons and 12 grandchildren. Now, walking in her footsteps as the current RBA director is Ahuna Eziakonwa. She's also the creator and co-convener of the Hekima series. I'd like to welcome her now to take over from me.
Thank you, Mark. And Madam President, what a wonderful opportunity you have given us to have this moment with you. Thank you and warm welcome to the second edition of Hekima series. And I want to also welcome my boss, Mr. Achim Steiner, who is here with us today. You know, Madam President, you left big shoes to fill in the Regional Bureau for Africa, UNDP. And I'm so humbled to be in this position after you. You indeed left a foundation that we are building on right now. And I want to thank you really from the bottom of my heart for everything that you mean to the continent and to our world. You're not just a leader in Africa, you are a global leader. And it is one of the reasons why we have you on in this second edition. Now, the UNDP administrator, when he took up his office, launched the next generation UNDP. And one would wonder, what is the next generation UNDP? He essentially established what we know today as Development 2.0, taking everything that we have learned in more than 5 decades of doing development on board and cultivating a new landscape, development paradigm that sees people not just as subjects of our development book, but as authors of their own development story. And this is what gives us the license today to establish the Hekima series, because it comes from that understanding and recognition that the solutions we seek for development may indeed reside in the countries where we are present. And in order to bring out these solutions, we create platforms that enable connections to happen and enable this wisdom to be mined. And, you know, I was talking to a young entrepreneur the other day, and he described UNDP as the Facebook of development. A very apt description, because this is the next generation UNDP, where we recognize that it is in collaborations, in building this collective wisdom and collective intelligence around development solutions, that we will win in a world where development challenges are indeed outpacing solutions that can be cultivated in one country or another. UNDP's global policy network helps us to tap into the global knowledge that exists about where the solutions could also be brought on board. But in our case, these solutions, when they come from our side, have to be adapted to the country reality. So our country presence, which is in practically every country on the continent of Africa, our country offices have become listening posts for the wisdom that comes from the population on the ground. They are not there to impose ideas, but to create opportunities to bring those ideas together. That is what makes the next generation UNDP, that we remain at the center of our mission, an agency that fights poverty, but that does so while protecting our environment and doing it in a sustainable manner. An agency that fights inequality. We believe that the world will not survive when only a few have the opportunity and access to excel. So shared prosperity is a mission of UNDP. And we believe that innovation, digital technology, can help us go faster. So we need to become stronger after COVID-19, but also we need to go faster, accelerating development to ensure that the Sustainable Development Goals are achieved, become a key principle that we pursue. And today, as we listen to Madam President and also the UNDP administrator, we will begin to touch on some of those ideas that will help UNDP to build solutions on the continent for sustainable lives and livelihoods. COVID-19 has left huge devastation in its tracks. It has disrupted life as we know it. But at UNDP, we believe that it also has created for us new opportunities to build forward stronger, better, and more sustainably. So we are delighted today, Mark, to have this opportunity to share with more than 600 people who have registered for this. And we welcome all of you and really look forward to an exciting moment with Madam President. Over back to you.
Thank you very much, Ahuna. Now I'd like to hand over to the administrator. We're so great. It's so great that you're here for the second Hekima. And I hope that you can join us for a lot more of them. This is an opportunity to have a conduit from some of Africa's deepest and most respected thinkers to the development actors and young people on the ground. So having you present here, Achim Steiner, is a blessing. I'll now hand the floor to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Mark and Ahuna, for your introductory words, but above all, Madam President, or dear Ma Ellen, as so many have come to know you and love you. For me personally, it's just an extraordinary pleasure to join you today and to welcome you with Ahuna in this new series, Hekima, the Swahili word for wisdom, a part of the world in Africa that I have spent many years, and I could not think of anybody more emblematic of the meaning of Hekima than having you speak today as part of what is essentially a very disturbed and disrupted world in which we are all operating. And this is nothing new to you, Madam President. You have lived through many, as Mark already said, moments and phases in history where the future was as uncertain as it may seem to many today. And I begin with this because it is in the wisdom of our elders, but it is also in the wisdom of those who have watched transformation and the emergence of new ideas, and your continuous appeal also to recognize and respect the contribution that young people can make, that I'm particularly excited that you have agreed to be part of this series today. I'm very conscious of the fact, and I often say this, that you know, in UNDP today, in that next generation UNDP that we are trying to understand, conceive, and develop, we stand on the shoulder of giants, of those who have gone before us. And again, as Mark pointed out, a part of your life is inextricably linked also to the history and the work of UNDP, and thus it is particularly meaningful to have you with us today. I don't want to stand in the way of you addressing all those who have joined this, this series today, but let me just offer perhaps two or three thoughts that I think make this kind of discussion so relevant and so meaningful to what happens next. First of all, I think humility is something that other parts of the world sometimes lack. I think often in Africa, we do find that recognition and the humility that, you know, there are no simple answers, especially not in a period such as this one, which is virtually without precedent in a global sense, and certainly for many of those alive today on the continent of Africa, with the exception of a few countries, and where, for example, Ebola, that you have also been so closely linked with in terms of trying to manage a situation that is so threatening to not just the health of people individually, but to the whole fabric of society, to our economies. And therefore, the ability to think in the midst of a crisis about the future takes enormous courage and the wisdom of both experience, but the wisdom of judgment, because it is choices that need to be made. And I think, as Ahuna pointed out, much of what I see UNDP doing in the future of development, because the era of development aid, in my mind, is long gone. That does not mean that development finance and support and solidarity and collaboration do not have their part in the future. But the solutions, the choices, the sovereign act of deciding what is the pathway for development of my community, of my country, of my continent, is one that has evolved very rapidly. And it is against this backdrop that we, first of all, are deeply disturbed right now, because what we witness and what we're beginning to see is the greatest reversal in human development in a generation. The Human Development Index that, Madam President, you know very well, just a few weeks ago in an update, found that the likely scenario over the next 12 months is that we will have the first decline in human development globally in the 30 years that this index has existed. And the profoundness of this cannot be described in statistical terms. Averages do not even capture it. It is in the individual livelihoods. It is in the realities of most people living in the informal sector, being without the ability to trade or work or sell or buy. There is no social safety net that protects them. There is nothing that can economically stabilize them. And therefore, what governments do next, how communities respond, must inform, first of all, our short-term response and reaction. But as a development program, it would be a failure of UNDP if we did not also focus on how do we find a trajectory out of this crisis? What is it that will provide the resilience, first of all, to communities, to nations, to economies, to get through this economic freefall, to the psychological trauma of what is happening, and then figure out a way in which we don't just build back better, we actually build forward better. These are slogans, these are easily spelled out metaphors, but behind them lies an extraordinarily important moment in human history, in the history of Africa and of every nation and community on the African continent, because what happens next will either enable us to actually move and address many of the issues that we already knew and have defined in the Sustainable Development Goals, which are, if you turn them on their head, really the 17 major risks that we face to the future of our development, but expressed in a positive way. It is also a moment in which I think we have to turn to our communities, to the people around us, who in fact every day take many decisions that are based on judgment, on the information available, but also on opportunities that they can leverage. So let me simply end these brief introductory remarks by saying that we are extremely grateful, proud, and humbled by your being available to us and through the wonderful medium of digital connection, even though so many still have to be connected to the internet and to broadband, to reflect on some of what lies ahead. And I begin by giving you one opening question that essentially seeks to ask, how can Africa, both in its diversity and in its Pan-African vision, come out of COVID-19 and regain its development confidence, its development trajectory, and put itself on a pathway that perhaps out of this crisis could see some leapfrogging forward, some really serious transformational responses, and avoid what is very often the temptation that we simply try to scramble back to the normal of yesterday. We know that tomorrow's economies, tomorrow's development agenda is simply not going to be yesterday's economy. And Africa, the continent that will grow the most in terms of people, in terms of its economies over the next 30 to 40 years, will become a defining force in a global development context also. And that is why what happens next and how African citizens, leaders, but also leaders in business, in communities choose to act will be so significant, well beyond the immediate context of the continent. With that, once again, a very warm welcome. We are so proud to have you with us, and I shall now go into silent mode and listen with great interest. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam. You have the floor. If you could unmute your microphone, Madam President, you have the floor to respond. We can hear you.
You can hear me now?
Yes, go ahead.
Well, Hakim, Ahuna, Mark, let me say what a great opportunity this is, for this opportunity to be with you and to join you as I interact with so many of those that we know have contributed to where we are in this world, and also of those who are being affected. I am grateful for this invitation, especially for this chance and this time to follow Professor Wole Soyinka. It's such an honor for me to do so. We all have admired him and continue to admire him for his works, for his long years of advocacy for African scholarship, and for change in Africa. Today, we are facing serious difficulties brought about by COVID-19, a pandemic that is the first we've seen in hundreds of years in the world. It comes at a time when the world we know is on a verge of change, a change that will affect and impact Africa. Even as we struggle to cope with the devastating effect, we must look ahead. And I listened to Hekima when she talked about 2.0, creating a new landscape for change, ensuring that people are the owners of their own development, a platform that will enable the exchanges, that will enable us to examine where we are in this world and how we can react to this momentum of change. UNDP has a Facebook of development. All of those things that resonate so well as we try to face these complexities and uncertainties of this new world. I have every conviction that Africa will emerge from this global crisis. But when we do, we will look on our duty to humanity better than when we did going into this crisis? Will we embrace inclusive growth so that more of Africa's poor may have a chance to rise out of poverty? Will we empower women, involve the youth, protect our children and their future more than we did going into this crisis? Will we govern more justly and expand the space for democratic governance? Will we finally end the wars on our continent and create an environment of safety and security for all to develop and to thrive? Ours is a continent of the young, the home to 16% of the world's population, a great challenge to us as to how we steer them into the future. We are blessed as a continent with natural resources, yet for many of our countries, we're still poor and collectively accounting for only 1% of the world's wealth. Can we do better? Can Africa do better? Yes. It must. We must truly desire to do better. A good place to start is to take responsibility for where we are and bravely adopt transformational agendas to lead us to where we ought to be. We must change. In the spirit of Ubuntu, we must learn from our failings and rededicate ourselves to making Africa a better place for all of its sons and daughters, irrespective of tribe, religion, age, or any other classification. You said, Achim, about humility, ability, courage. All of those characteristics that would be required as we formulate this new agenda, the transformation agenda of which we speak so often. And I believe UNDP, as the Facebook of Africa, UNDP that has championed a long time development of capacities to be able to address the challenges of development. The Human Development Report to which you referred, and how that has been a guide to countries as they examine their own performances and their own responses to the challenges they face from day to day. As we go forward and you establish the new landscape, making everyone owners of their own development, we will then begin to see how that influences our continent to adopt those transformation policies. I look forward to the discussions that will follow, to listen to the comments that will be made, and to welcome the questions that will come so that we all have an opportunity for the exchange on how we will respond to those questions that our young brothers and sisters out there will be asking. Thank you again for this opportunity to join you.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. And I want to thank the UN Administrator and the RBA Director for getting us started there. Very powerful words from you, Madam, and very, very uncertain future. The Administrator put it into words, the greatest decline in human development in our lifetime. So some challenging times ahead of us, and partnerships, collaboration, and fresh thinking is what's required. Now we move on to the Q&A segment. This is the meat of Hekima, where we have 3 conduits for questions that we'll ask Madame today. First, the UNDP has asked its country offices, its offices in 45 countries across Africa, to curate the most pressing, burning questions they can from citizens and youth and individuals in their country. Next, we'll be keeping a keen eye on the Q&A box here on Zoom, so please keep your questions and comments coming in. And finally, we have 5 very different interveners from across Africa who are standing by, who come on in the course of this session to ask their questions in person. So, Madam President, if I could start, please, with a question for you from the Central African Republic. This is from Yusufa. And Yusufa says, we have seen African governments copying those measures adopted from developed countries, and yet these were not adapted to the African context, nor did Africa have the means to implement them sometimes. Don't you think that Africa should choose another path or alternative that takes into account the African context? And if so, what would that be? Paint a picture for us, please. Madam.
We have grappled a long time with the systems we inherited and have sought to find a way to change them. Our political systems, our economic systems, our social systems, many of them copycatting the ways of our colonialists who interjected them into our living conditions. We have to change, but change with the changes of a new world. We now have a world in which digital technology is the main engine for driving development, for driving productivity. How are we going to fit our economic, our trading systems into this change, a change that we are still becoming fully acquainted with, understanding the knowledge of what this means for what we want to achieve. Our political systems, yes, could indeed use some changes to enable us to stop the competition that we all face when there are voting systems that can sometimes be manipulated. And we've made some progress in this regard. I always say we have one or two of our countries that have a managed political systems. Well, succession is well planned in advance. Is this something we want to look at? Is that something that can be adopted by more of the countries rather than the system we now have that said winners take it all? Yes, I do believe that we can find new ways. Certainly, our economic structure that are tied to the trading systems of the past and the partnerships of the past have not enabled us to promote Africa regional and integration at the pace necessary. And so there again, there's room for us being able to disrupt those long-standing structural deficiencies in the dark systems that have more regional interaction, more regional cooperation. And so I say to you, it's a tough job. We're so accustomed to what we do, and each country wants to accelerate its pace of development, and change is disruptive without realizing what the full consequences will be. But the young today are demanding change, and I think they're going to help us to find a means whereby these systems can indeed be reformed. Reform in such a way, though, that we preserve the means whereby we can continue to ensure better lives for all our people.
Madam, you're known for your warmth and as Ma Ellen. So this next question, which comes from Ghana, is almost tailor-made for you. A recent letter from over 100 African academics from across the continent and the diaspora called for leaders to, quote, govern with compassion as we tackle the challenges of COVID-19 and beyond. What would your message to African leaders be, and what kind of leaders do we need coming out of this crisis, madam?
I don't think we needed COVID-19 to remind us that we have to govern with compassion. All leaders interested in the welfare of their citizens, in whatever they do to promote equity, to ensure justice, to provide opportunities for education and improve health, do this because they care for the people they govern. And so, yes, we do need compassion, not because of COVID, or not because the realization comes from COVID, but because it's something that should be natural in the way we govern. That's how we get the support of our people. That's how we are able to deliver the agenda that we have for the development and improvement of our people. And so I say governing with compassion is what a good leader will do all the time.
Okay, madam, I'm going to take the first intervention, one of 5 interventions. And I think I mentioned very early on that they're all very different, coming from different angles, a very eclectic group of individuals that will come onto camera and ask their questions directly to you. Your first intervener, Your Excellency, is Marina Imanishimwe, who is a fellow of the African Young Women Leaders Fellowship Program here at UNDP. So Marina, are you with us? If you're with us, please go ahead and ask Your Excellency the question.
Thank you, Mark. Good afternoon, Your Excellency. Good afternoon, everyone. It is such an honor and a privilege and a pleasure to be part of this discussion. So, Your Excellency, we have seen that many women in Africa have lost their jobs or their small businesses due to COVID-19. We have also seen an alarming rise in domestic violence against women who are often bound by their culture not to speak up. So my question is, Your Excellency, what should the governments in Africa do to empower and protect African women whilst considering their cultural norms? Thank you.
Marina, Marina, are you hearing me?
Yes.
Okay.
Marina, switch off your, yes, go ahead, madam.
The lockdown that we're all facing have unintended consequences, unfortunately. Right now, it has caused the breakdown of informal systems. We find so many of our young people, women who are doing their marketing, young men, young boys who are doing petty trading. We find that their lives are disrupted, their businesses cannot go on. And those, many times, those are businesses that are done on a daily basis to provide income on a daily basis for sustenance of the family. We know that women and girls can become subject to abuse during this period of lockdown because they are restrained from going out. Our women farmers cannot, because they are restricted, cannot do the cross-border trading they do, even within their counties and their areas of farming, because they have to remain as social distancing. They can't have the kind of interaction and cooperation and collaboration that they're accustomed to. And so what do? I believe governments must now respond to these unintended consequences. COVID-19 is leading to resources that are being given to our countries. I would like to see a certain percentage of the COVID-19 directed at helping these many young entrepreneurs who would have to close their businesses if they do not get this support. We hope that we will see security forces expand their areas of surveillance for the protection of women. We would like to see all the obstacles from those in the informal sector, from those who are those that really are the buoyant element of our society, receive from all governments the kind of attention and the kind of support to ensure that their livelihood is not disrupted so much that they're unable to carry on when COVID-19 ends. I believe some governments are responding to this, but there's always room for more, always room for improvement. And when it comes to women, like yourself, Marina, I hope we'll see the kind of actions that lead to attitudinal change for women, for what they face, for what they can do to be a major contributor to development, a major participant in decisions. And young ones like yourself, I hope leaders will reach out to you and listen to you and listen to you and your colleagues and see how they can shape their actions and their policies to take into account so that you too can achieve your goals and your dreams.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. I know
Thank you
that.
very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. I know that that question is going to come back again, but I just want to turn to your wealth of experience when it comes to the fight against COVID-19. A question that's coming in says, you were lauded for rebuilding Liberia's damaged institutions and infrastructure post-conflict, as well as your fight against Ebola 2014 to 2016. What lessons, madam, can you share right now from your experience as we fight COVID-19?
Let me try to give 4 prime lessons of experience in the fight for Ebola. Leadership. One has to have hands-on, exemplary leadership at all levels in society. And that means recognizing the leadership potential and capacity of those in the sub-areas, those in the communities, those in the rural areas who will also be affected by the disease. A second lesson is communication. So many times, our people don't know what is at stake. What is the severity and the consequences of the disease? What is the government doing to address it and to resolve it? And so they then can have all kinds of misunderstandings. It's led to violence, it's led to resistance. And so unless there is regular, honest, timely communication to the public, if you want compliance, if you want implementation of containment measures, the public must feel a part of it, know what it is, and then you can find, otherwise there'll be problems. So communication. Our third one was coordination. You know, so many times different stakeholders with mandates for responding have their own agendas, have their own methods of being able to carry out their functions. And sometimes they get all crossed and you find competing responses, competing information, and a lot of confusion. And so the leadership must have a proper coordination in which there is a common agenda from which everyone works to carry out their responsibilities and their mandate. And that means that that coordination must be continually examined, continually changed when necessary to meet changing circumstances. Without that, you end up with cross-circuiting of things and thereby minimize the full effectiveness of what you're trying to achieve. Partnership. In Liberia, we couldn't do it alone. We didn't have the means, the capacity, or the resources to do it alone. And so we had to build our partnership. We had great partnership with Africa, African countries whose young people came out and joined with our young people to provide some of the services that were needed in the response. We had our partners, bilateral and multilateral partners, that provided financial resources, technical assistance, and that partnership must also have a certain coordination, so you don't have people again trying to compete, and then thereby limit again the effectiveness. So that partnership was important, and like I say, Ebola struck primarily three poor West African countries, even though Ebola had struck in the Democratic Republic of the Congo 3 decades before. There were no vaccines, but the research on vaccines finally started with Ebola, and I'm so glad today that we now have a research effort is being accelerated, and today we think there will be a vaccine, sometime in the future for COVID-19, and that also will ensure that other infectious diseases gain the kind of attention they need and develop through research the means whereby one can respond to preventing them in such a way that we don't see them again become another virus hitting that could destroy us. So that was our experience in Ebola. And who do we blame it? Who do we credit? Our community workers, our community leaders. They were the stars, and they were the ones that made it happen. So the more we can do for them, to train them, to give them better pay, to give them the better means whereby they can carry out their functions, the sooner we will see that we can combat any virus that may be able to hit the country.
You're such a champion for young people, and such an inspiration to know that you care. I was reading a tweet, because, by the way, if anybody wants to stay abreast of Madame's thinking, just log on to her Twitter handle, because she's very much on social media. And I follow her, and I know that you spoke recently about the social cohesion, the fabric of society, that it can be torn asunder if there's not youth inclusion. Now, one particular youth that has been capturing people's imagination, he did a very spirited call for Pan-Africanism in a sense of self-worth and pride in Africa, is a young man called Usman Toure from the Gambia. This viral video had him being interviewed about why he had chosen not to go to universities in America, in the United States and Canada, where he was offered positions, and stay here in Africa. He's going to be a postgraduate student in Rwanda after the summer. We tracked him down, Usman Toure, and he's here today. He's a graduate of University of Gambia. Usman has a question for you, madam. Usman, are you there? Please ask madam your question.
Yeah, good afternoon, madam. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mark, for giving me such a wonderful opportunity. And thank you so much, Your Excellency. I am so much delighted to share this platform with you. My question to you will be, how can we reconcile economic growth and environmental protection as a continent in order to prevent both human and natural disasters? Thank you.
Usman, today we're seeing the result of our failure to protect our environment over many, many years. Yes, we concentrated on growth, and we had to do so because growth leads to production and productivity, and we need that. But if we look at the results of environmental degradation, we look at what's happening in places like Mozambique, so many other places, in our own countries, those of us who are on the ocean, and we see the water that's coming in the sea beginning to penetrate into the land. We look at the changes in planting systems. We look at what's happening with our trees. being toned down for charcoal. We know that while we must again have growth to propel our economy, but in doing so, we must make sure that part of the agenda for growth must be protecting the environment that provides the natural resources upon which most of our people live. Most of our people find their sustenance and their livelihood. And so climate change has not received the kind of attention. We've all known that there are major agreements coming out of Paris and others for cooperation among countries to ensure that there is full environmental protection. But we in our countries, our leaders of our countries, must take the first step. They must, in the country's agenda, put in those policies that lead to the protection of the environment. If our own case in Liberia is an example, we had to have a partnership with Norway to be able to protect our forests that were being destroyed. And I think so many other countries are finding the means whereby, fortunately too, I think the African Union and the regional economic commissions are now determining action that needs to be taken, protocols that need to be adopted for the protection of the environment to ensure that all of our countries see the importance of making sure that environment is a part of the agenda going forward post-COVID-19.
Thank you so much.
And thank you very much, Usman, and good luck with your postgraduate studies in Rwanda. We wish you the best.
Oh, may I say something else? Let me interrupt with Usman. Usman, I want to say something else because I need to applaud you. I need to applaud you for that decision to stay and do your graduate studies in Africa. If much of the amount we spent on scholarships for higher level training for our people were spent in developing our own institutions, our own national institutions, more of the young people would be like you, Usman. Fortunately, we do have some good ones in South and Eastern Africa, Western Africa as well, but we could have more, and we could have more that are closer to rural communities where kids don't have to leave the rural areas and come for quality education into the cities and thereby, don't have the means for life. So, Usman, I commend you. And I think what you've done, you've blazed a path, you see many others following. And maybe policies will also change in countries, and you will see much more budget allocation to promote higher education quality in all of our universities and community schools.
Thank you so much.
That was wonderful, Usman. Wonderful, and good luck. And thank you very much for that. Now, Madam, a little bird told us that you are a farmer and you're passionate about farming and agriculture. I understand you grow rice and guava and mangoes on your farm. Even last week, I think we called you and you were on your farm. Agriculture being an important thing for you, food security, these are things that weigh on your mind. Now, this next question sort of points to that. It's from Shamiso Ruzvidzo. She's one of your interveners. She's going to join us now. Shamiso, are you there? Shamiso is the head of exploration at UNDP Accelerator Lab in Zimbabwe. Shamiso, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Mark. Your Excellency, Madame Johnson Sirleaf, it's an absolute honor to be speaking with you today. To give some context before I ask my question, 86% of Africa's labor force is within the informal sector. This includes agriculture. A large percentage of them are women and young people with limited access to quality education or skills acquisition that would give them opportunities in the formal sector. They are also the most vulnerable to the adverse economic impact of COVID-19. with more than 82% of people having no access to social protection at all. For many, the inability to work is a greater threat than the health impact of the pandemic itself. So with that, Your Excellency, my question is, if we reimagine the new informal sector post-COVID-19, what would it look like for you? What should it look like? Thank you.
Thank you, Shamisa, for that. And I'm so glad you mentioned 86% of people in the informal sector are those who really are in agriculture. Agriculture being the key to development in Africa, because we're all agrarian societies with very inadequate use of our land. And so, fortunately today, African leaders have decided that agriculture must be a key priority in all of the national agendas, supported through our regional endeavor for cooperation and integration. What can be done for some of these 86, the majority of which are women? We need, first of all, to ensure that they have land rights. So many of our women in the rural areas cannot tell you that they have a deed to their property. Some of them live on it without having ownership, or maybe it's owned by husbands or by fathers. So definitely, in fact, all the factors of production, access to credit, and many countries have adopted very, very means of providing resources to women farmers, resources to farmers generally. And so giving them land, ensuring them credit are important. Finding support for our women who do cross-border trading. We're not aware of sometimes what they go through. And that leads to making sure that we can find a way to address violence in our societies against women. All security measures must include protection of women,